지난 5월 줄리 터너 미국 국무부 북한인권 특사가 우리나라를 방문했었죠. 당시 북한의 내부 통제 강화에 대응해서 외부 정보를 공급할 새로운 방식을 찾는 중이라고 밝혔는데요. KBS가 단독으로 진행했던 줄리 터너 특사와의 인터뷰 영상으로 함께 보시겠습니다.
It's really happy to have you here. And I want to give you my first question. North Korea constantly denies the existence of South Korean abductees, and they refuse to verify their status. So is there any way we can verify if the victims are alive?
So I think in some instances there have been refugees or escapees from North Korea who have been able to verify that they did in fact see a particular individual or knew a particular individual. Some of the abductees were previously a part of family reunifications in past years. And so I think there is acknowledgement that they are there. The UN Commission of Inquiry report that was produced in 2014 also highlights this as a population. And so a UN body has done a pretty extensive investigation into this issue and found that they do in fact exist.
And our goal is to bring the abductees back to their family, right? But what would be the most effective approach to achieve that?
One, I will also say that because there is an aging issue for many of those affected individuals, that we want to bring people home or to allow them to be reunited with their loved ones, but in some instances the end goal may just be getting answers for families because we don't know whether all of them are alive. I think there are a number of tools in which we can press or pressure the North Korean government to come back to the table and to work towards resolution. I think the really important piece is continued trilateral cooperation. There are individuals that have been separated by the North Korean regime's policies in Japan, in the ROK, and even for the US, there are wartime divided family members who are also seeking reunification. And so continuing to use the trilateral format as an opportunity to work together to apply that pressure is really important.
Okay, I understand. And I'd like to move to our next topic, free flow of information, like described in this wall. So Kim Jong-un is now enforcing laws. You called it 3 evil laws and strongly enforcing it than before. Is the flow of information into North Korea progressing as planned or as intended now?
So I think that the fact that these 3 laws have been passed is an important indicator that that information, independent information from the outside is flowing in to North Korea. I think these laws are a reaction to that. The government is afraid of the impact that that information can have. But in terms of whether or not the flows and the channels for getting information in are working, I think absolutely. There is also clearly a demand coming from the North Korean population that they are hungry for independent and credible information.
Right.
And so that demand is what is largely driving the flow of information. And I think we're verifying that impact through some of the refugee and defector testimony from individuals that have left recently.
Could you share that testimony with us a little bit?
You know, over the course of my 20 years of working on North Korean human rights, I've met with many refugees and escapees, and every single individual that I have met with has a light bulb moment where they realize that the information that I've been fed by the state is not true. And for almost every one of those individuals, the light bulb is turned on by contact that they've had with some sort of foreign source of information. Sometimes it's a radio broadcast, Sometimes it's a television show. There are some recent refugees that have reported actually having seen KBS television shows in North Korea, or it was a USB drive full of South Korean dramas. In another instance, a woman told me it was actually a South Korean hair product that she was using while she was overseas. The realization that at home she wouldn't have access to that same kind of product was the moment for her. And so there are a lot of different channels for that exposure, but the bottom line is having access to choice and being able to pull that information from a lot of different sources oftentimes is very eye-opening to a North Korean who hasn't had that access in the past.
Certainly. And Ambassador, are you exploring like delivery measures beyond the traditional media, like, as you said, radio or sending USBs?
That people find interesting and that people find useful, because at the end of the day, our goal here is to create an informed citizenry who has access to independent and credible information. And so I think the important thing is to continue to be open and to continue to invest in exploring new tools that could be useful.
Then Ambassador, based on your experience, what kind of information do you think is the most effective in bringing in some changes to North Korean society? Like, is it like entertainment content, or is it content created by refugees or SKBs overseas?
I think diversity in content is important. It is one of the things that I have made mental notes to myself over the years. Is for somebody it was The Fast and the Furious, or for somebody else it was Titanic. For someone else it was a KBS broadcast. Specifically one looking at North Korean refugees and how they were living here in Seoul. Another one, it was a radio broadcast about a train delay in South Korea that they were able to actually receive in North Korea.
Ambassador, what is your estimate of the number of North Korean workers sent abroad recently, like this year? Do you have the number?
I don't have a number off the
Not
top of my
exactly,
head.
but yeah.
You know, over the years, that number has, I think, prior to COVID, the U.S. government had largely estimated it to be in the hundreds of thousands, but I don't have an accurate number right now on.
But you said in February that North Korea appears to have resumed the labor export, right? So is there any actual evidence to prove this recently?
I think we're hearing this from various sources in the border area, that some workers are now starting to be deployed again, and much of that is kind of consistent with other patterns that we've seen in the past. So.
And do you see any evidence that North Korea recently intensified their surveillance on their workers, their North Korean workers working overseas?
I think that there is generally a concern about a growing number of defections and individuals that are choosing not to return. And so I think more broadly we're seeing a higher level of surveillance across the board in relation to North Korea because of the fear of increased defections, and a number of civil society groups have been reporting on that recently, including shifts in policies within North Korea to try to prevent people from defecting.
In the current situation in which the United States Security Council is dysfunctional, is there any, like, what measures or sanctions are being considered to stop the labor export? Is there any measures?
From a unilateral perspective, the U.S. has a number of tools that we can and are using, including import restrictions on goods that have been made with North Korean forced labor. The U.S. government also has various sanctions authorities that would allow us to take action against a company or an entity that is involved in the use of North Korean overseas workers. or in the commission of human rights abuses, which we would consider forced labor to be in that category of abuses.
Do you believe that Kim Jong-un would be willing to come to a dialogue table, even under the condition to discuss just human rights issues? Do you see it as a possible scenario?
I hope so, and we have made it clear, I have made it clear that we are ready to sit down and have a frank and open exchange on human rights or on a whole host of other issues without preconditions. I hope that in the end, the North Korean government and the U.S. can get to the table on a human rights, in a human rights exchange, because at the end of the day, it's about the welfare of the North Korean people.
Right.
And governments are intended to serve the people. This is not just about finger wagging, it's about improving the well-being and the safety and security of the North Korean people.
So how do you view U.S. policy on North Korean human rights for the last 4 years? Because here in Korea, there's also some critics that there hasn't been like significant progress in the situation in North Korea, even though the U.S. devoted a large amount of resources and efforts.
I think I'm looking at it from the frame of many years of work in the human rights space across many different regions. But one, human rights are a journey and not necessarily an end state, because no government is perfect. And so the expectation that we're going to go from where North Korea is at right now with political prison camps and public executions and the laundry list of abuses to free and open society where rights are protected is an unrealistic jump to make overnight. And so thinking about the long game and what kind of incremental progress can be made. And so along those lines, I do think that we have seen anecdotal evidence that the North Korean government is reacting to the things that we're saying. You were focused on forced abortions, and suddenly the government's policy on forced abortions changed. Or you were focused on prison conditions, and suddenly there was an interest in changing that external perception, and so the government issued new orders to change their policy. Even in the disability rights space, we've seen them make progress by signing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, allowing a UN Special Rapporteur in. I think we've got to also look for continued opportunities where they may signal a willingness to change.
Will the current U.S. policy on North Korean human rights remain unchanged, even if Trump wins the election?
I think the U.S. Political conversation around North Korean human rights is bipartisan and has been consistently from the start. It's one of the few areas where the North Korean Human Rights Act has generally moved forward with widespread co-sponsorship, bipartisan co-sponsorship, and I don't expect that to change.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
It was a great talk.
Thank you.
고맙습니다.